He didn't know he was already too late. By the time Marcus Hale reviewed the paperwork his assistant had placed on his desk that Tuesday morning, the filing had already been stamped, dated, and entered into the county system. He thought he was managing a situation. He was actually watching one unfold without him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is not important right now. What matters is that I was 31 years old, working as a registered nurse at a mid-sized hospital in Columbus, Ohio, pulling 12-hour shifts 3 days a week, and taking online courses toward my nurse practitioner license on the other days. I was not naive. I was not reckless. I was a person who had built a quiet, careful life, and I was proud of it. I met him at a fundraiser gala for the hospital's pediatric wing. He was one of the major donors, 44 years old, twice divorced, the kind of man who filled a room without trying. He was the CEO of a regional pharmaceutical distribution company his father had built and he had scaled. His name was on 2 buildings in the city. He had a smile that made you feel like you were the only person worth talking to, and I was not immune to it. We dated for 7 months. It was not a whirlwind. It was measured, adult, and real. Or so I believed. He met my sister. I met his golf friends. We talked about the future in that vague, comfortable way people do when they feel safe. I was careful. I was on birth control. I was doing everything right. And then one morning in March, I was staring at a pregnancy test on the edge of my bathroom sink, and the word that appeared was not the one I had expected. I sat on the cold tile floor for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in those first hours. Fear, yes, but also something quieter underneath it. Something that felt, despite everything, like it wanted to stay. I was 31. I had a stable job. I had health insurance. I had a sister who would show up with food and not ask too many questions. I was scared, but I was not without resources. What I did not yet know was how alone I was about to become. I called him that evening. He was calm on the phone. He said all the initial right things. We'll figure this out together. And, just come over and we'll talk. I drove to his house in the suburb where the lots were an acre each, and the driveways were paved with pavers that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He poured me water. He sat across from me at his kitchen island and he listened. Then he said, "I think you should take care of it." I asked him what he meant. He said, "You know what I mean." I told him I didn't think I could do that. He nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they've already moved on to the next part of the conversation. He said he understood, and that this was of course my decision. He said he would support whatever I chose. He refilled my water. He walked me to my car. He did not call me the next day, or the day after that. 3 weeks later, when I was 10 weeks along and the nausea had settled into a permanent background hum in my life, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. The man on the other end introduced himself as a representative of a private consulting firm. He said he was calling on behalf of a mutual acquaintance. He used that word, acquaintance, and something in my chest went cold. He told me that his client wanted to offer a gesture of goodwill. He said the figure was $300,000. He said it would be wired within 48 hours. He said there was one condition, which was a non-disclosure agreement and he paused here and chose his word carefully, the resolution of the pregnancy. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage, still in my scrubs, and I listened to this man speak. When he finished, I asked him one question. I asked him who exactly had authorized him to make this call. He said he wasn't at liberty to say. I thanked him for his time, and I ended the call. Then I sat in my car for 22 minutes. I know it was 22 minutes because I watched the clock on my dashboard the entire time, just to give myself something to anchor to. The concrete of the parking garage was gray. The fluorescent light above me buzzed faintly. I put my hand on my stomach, which was still completely flat, and I thought about what kind of person I wanted to be at the end of this story. I drove home. I called my sister. I told her everything. She said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to call a lawyer." She said, "I'll be at your place in 20 minutes. The lawyer my sister found was a woman named Patricia who worked out of a small firm downtown that specialized in family law. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she had a wall of plaques behind her desk that she never once referenced. She let me talk for 40 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she put down her pen and she looked at me directly. She said, "Tell me one thing. Do you want to have this child?" I said yes. She said, "Then here is what we're going to do." Patricia explained that in Ohio, an unmarried father has both rights and obligations, but those obligations don't enforce themselves, they require action. She told me that the earlier we established paternity and filed for support, the stronger our position would be. She told me that prenatal paternity testing was legally admissible in Ohio under certain conditions, and that we could move forward with establishing legal paternity before the birth if he agreed, or pursue it immediately after delivery if he did not. She told me something else too. She said that the phone call I had received from the consulting firm was not legal advice, it was pressure. She said that no contract signed under that kind of coercion would hold up, and that the mere existence of that call was, in fact, useful to us. I asked her what she meant by useful. She smiled and said, "It tells us who we're dealing with." I left her office that afternoon with a folder of intake forms, a retainer agreement, and something I hadn't had in 3 weeks, a direction to walk in. He did not respond to Patricia's first outreach letter. His personal attorney, not the consulting firm, a different attorney, called Patricia 2 days later and said that his client was not prepared to acknowledge any relationship to the matter at hand. Patricia told me this over the phone while I was on my lunch break, eating a turkey sandwich in the hospital break room, and I remember thinking, he's going to make this hard. He made it hard. His attorney filed motions. There were delays. There were requests for additional documentation. There was a deposition scheduled and then rescheduled and then rescheduled again. I kept going to work. I kept studying for my NP boards. I grew visibly pregnant and my coworkers were kind and some of them didn't ask questions, and that was its own kind of grace. At 22 weeks, I underwent a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. It involved a blood draw from me and a cheek swab we had been legally authorized to obtain. The process was unremarkable. I sat in a clinical chair and a technician labeled the vials, and I drove to work afterward and treated 4 patients and came home and made pasta for dinner. The results came back 12 days later. Patricia called me at 7:14 in the morning. She said, "The results are conclusive. We move forward." I sat down on my couch and I did not cry exactly. It was something else. A kind of stillness, like the moment after a very loud noise when the silence is so complete it feels physical. That same afternoon, a licensed process server arrived at the corporate headquarters of his company. His assistant, I was told later, brought the envelope directly into a board meeting. I have tried not to take too much satisfaction in that detail. I have not entirely succeeded. What happened next was what Patricia had prepared me for, but that doesn't mean it was easy. His legal team came in with considerable resources. They argued about income calculation methods. They argued about what constituted his base compensation versus his equity distributions. They filed for independent financial audits. They questioned the validity of the prenatal testing methodology. Patricia was not rattled. I watched her in those proceedings and I understood, in a new way, what professional competence looks like when it's pointed in your direction. She had a binder for everything. She had case law cited to the page number. When his attorneys raised the income calculation argument, she had already prepared a counter-filing that included documentation of his real estate holdings, his ownership stake in a second company, and 3 years of tax returns that had been obtained through the formal discovery process. There was one afternoon in the courthouse hallway. I was about 30 weeks pregnant by then. My back ached constantly, and I had come straight from a shift when his lead attorney approached Patricia while I was standing right there. He spoke in a low, controlled voice. He said that his client was prepared to offer a significantly improved settlement. He said the number had been revised upward considerably. He said the offer included a trust structure that would be, and I remember this phrase clearly, more than generous by any reasonable measure. Patricia looked at him pleasantly and said, "We'll see you inside." I want to explain something about that moment, because I've thought about it many times since. It wasn't bravado. I was exhausted. I had swollen ankles. I had not slept more than 5 hours in weeks. Part of me, a real, honest part, was tired enough to wonder if settling would just make the whole thing stop. But I thought about that phone call, the one from the consulting firm. I thought about the word he had used, resolution. Like a problem to be solved. Like a spreadsheet entry to be cleared. My daughter was not a resolution. I walked into that courtroom. The judge in our case was methodical and unimpressed by theater. She read documents carefully. She asked precise questions. She did not appear to be moved by the fact that the man across the courtroom had a name on a building downtown. When his attorneys made their income arguments, she requested clarification 3 times. When Patricia presented the equity documentation, the judge made a note and did not look up for a long time. The final child support order was entered on a Thursday morning in November. My daughter had been born 6 weeks earlier, healthy and loud and completely indifferent to all of it. She was home with my sister when the order came through. Patricia called me from the courthouse steps. The number was not what his attorneys had argued for. It was not the capped calculation they had tried to establish. The court had used the full income picture Patricia had documented, including the equity distributions and the secondary ownership stake. The monthly obligation was significant. There was also a retroactive component covering prenatal medical expenses. Patricia read me the figures. I wrote them on a notepad next to my coffee maker and stared at them for a long time. Then I called my sister and she screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I want to be careful here because I know what some people want this part of the story to be. They want it to be triumph. They want the villain to be humiliated. They want me to feel vindicated in a clean, satisfying way. The truth is more layered than that. He never called to ask about her. Not once. His attorney has handled all of the compliance. The payments come on time every month, processed through a financial institution, no personal contact whatsoever. My daughter is 4 months old right now. She has his eye color and my stubbornness, and she wakes up at 5 a.m. like it's her job. He is, for all practical purposes, a line item. That is sad. Not for me. I made peace with what he was a long time ago. It is sad for her, eventually. That reckoning will come, and I will help her through it. But that is a future conversation. What I want to say to anyone who might be listening to this in a parking garage or a break room or cold bathroom floor, the system that felt designed to protect him from accountability, it's real, and it has money behind it, and it will absolutely try to exhaust you. But it has rules, and those rules apply to everyone, including men whose names are on buildings. Patricia told me something in our first meeting that I wrote down and kept. She said, "The law doesn't care about his discomfort. It cares about your daughter's security." I have read that sentence many times in the months since. There were moments, many of them, when I wanted to accept the settlement, not because it was right, but because I was tired and pregnant and working full-time and studying for a professional license, and I just wanted it to be over. Those feelings were real, and I am not ashamed of them. I stayed in it anyway. I want to be honest about the cost, too. My credit card debt from legal fees not covered by the retainer. The hours I spent compiling documents instead of resting, the emotional weight of walking into a courthouse 8 months pregnant, while the other side sat in expensive suits and used measured voices to argue that my daughter's father's equity distributions didn't count as income. That weight was real. I am still carrying some of it, but here is what is also true. My daughter has financial security that I did not have to provide alone. I finished my NP coursework 3 weeks after she was born, sleep-deprived and running on stubbornness. I have a job I love in a field where I know I am good at what I do. My sister and I have dinner together every Sunday. My daughter sits in a bouncy seat in the kitchen and watches us like she's gathering data. My life does not look like the one I imagined at 31. It looks harder in some ways and clearer in others. I know what I'm made of in a way I didn't before. I know who showed up and who didn't. I know the difference between a man who offers you money and a man who offers you accountability, and I know which one is worth anything. He made a calculation that I was a variable he could manage. He miscalculated. The most important thing I did in this entire process was not pick the right attorney, though that mattered enormously. It was not file at the right time, though timing helped. It was not stay calm in the courthouse hallway, though I am proud of that. The most important thing I did was decide, on a cold tile floor, with a pregnancy test on the edge of my sink, that the person growing quietly inside me deserved someone who did not flinch. I decided to be that person. Everything else followed. What I keep coming back to is the phone call, not the one I made to Patricia. The one I received. The one from the man who called himself a representative of a consulting firm and used the word resolution, like my daughter was a line on a balance sheet. That call was not an accident. It was a calculation, and calculations like that only get made when someone has decided with confidence that the person on the other end of the line will accept them. He had done the math on me. He looked at what I was, a nurse, 31, unmarried, pregnant, working shifts in a hospital, and he decided the number was low enough and I was tired enough and the situation was uncomfortable enough that I would take it and disappear. That is not cruelty in the dramatic sense. It is something quieter and, I think, worse. It is the assumption that some people simply do not have the will to insist on being seen. He was wrong. But here is what I want to say carefully. I was not strong because I am exceptional. I was strong because I made a decision, on a bathroom floor, before I had any idea how hard the road ahead would be. Strength does not arrive fully formed. It is built by the choices we make before we know the cost. I decided my daughter deserved someone who did not flinch, and then I had to keep being that person through every deposition, every delay, every morning I drove to a courthouse after a 12-hour shift with swollen ankles and a mind full of doubt. That is what I mean when I say intelligence matters, not cleverness, not strategy, though those helped. I mean the kind of intelligence that asks, what is actually happening here, and what does it require of me? The consulting firm call required me to understand that pressure disguised as generosity is still pressure. The settlement offer in the hallway required me to understand that exhaustion is not the same as defeat. Every moment in that process required me to see clearly, even when I was tired enough that clarity felt like a luxury. And what I learned about character, about the kind of person you actually are, is that it only shows up under conditions like these. You do not know what you're made of when things are comfortable. You find out in parking garages, in courthouse hallways, in the break room on your lunch break, when a stranger tells you a number and waits for you to fold. What I found out about myself is that I could keep going, not because I was fearless, but because I decided the reason to keep going was bigger than the fear. The outcome mattered. Of course it did. The court order, the support, the financial security my daughter now has, those are real, and I fought for them, and I am glad. But the outcome is not the point. The point is who I became in the process of pursuing it. I am a different person than the one who sat on that bathroom floor. I am clearer. I am less willing to be managed. I understand, in my bones, that the people who try to buy your silence are counting on you to believe their version of your own smallness. I no longer believe it. Neither should you.